Something major just happened in Minnesota, and this fraud crackdown is no longer just a headline. We now have a massive prison sentence, new federal charges, and a warning that more may be coming. The central figure in the Minnesota food aid fraud case has been sentenced to more than 4 decades behind bars. Prosecutors described a scheme involving nearly $250 million meant to help feed hungry children. And that is the part Americans cannot just scroll past, because this money was supposed to serve vulnerable kids. When public money meant for children gets stolen, accountability cannot be optional or symbolic. The sentence came after prosecutors reportedly pushed for a far harsher term than the defense requested. The final number landed much closer to what prosecutors wanted, and that sends a very clear message. If you treat taxpayer programs like a personal bank account, federal prosecutors are now saying the bill is due. But stay with me, because the prison sentence is only the first piece of this story. According to the announcement described in the source material, federal officials also revealed new fraud charges. Those charges reportedly involve 15 defendants and roughly $90 million in alleged taxpayer losses. Listen to those numbers again, because this is not a small paperwork mistake or a minor audit problem. Officials described multiple state-managed Medicaid programs allegedly being targeted across several states. And the most disturbing part is that some programs existed to help people in deeply vulnerable situations. One housing support program was reportedly shut down after costs exploded far beyond the original projection. So now ask the obvious question: who gets hurt when fraud burns through money meant for public services? It is not the political class that pays first. It is taxpayers, families, and people waiting for real help. The announcement also pointed to an autism services program where costs reportedly skyrocketed over several years. And officials made clear they did not believe ordinary demand explains that kind of explosive increase. And this is why the enforcement language matters. Officials are not describing a glitch. They are describing alleged fraud. The message from federal officials was blunt: report suspicious activity before another program gets drained. And that warning should matter to every American who pays taxes and expects public programs to serve real people. Because once fraud becomes a culture, honest families get pushed behind the people gaming the system. The source material also described kickback allegations involving childcare centers and enrollment incentives. Now, allegations are not convictions, and every defendant gets due process. But the pattern being described is serious. America can be compassionate and still demand that aid programs not become open season for scammers. The food aid case is already one of the clearest examples of why oversight cannot be treated like politics. The money was not abstract. It was tied to meals, children, community groups, and emergency relief. When that trust is broken, the damage goes beyond dollars. It weakens faith in every public program. And this is where the media angle comes in, because critics and supporters are now fighting over who saw it first. And some independent voices argued for months that the public deserved more scrutiny and stronger investigation. And now, after a major sentence and fresh charges, those warnings look a lot harder to dismiss. To be clear, raising oversight questions is not the same thing as proving every political accusation. The source material included political accusations, but this briefing will separate court action from commentary. What is confirmed in the narrative is the sentence, the alleged scale, and the broader enforcement push. And what remains disputed is who knew what, when they knew it, and whether oversight failed at higher levels. On the political side, critics are pointing at state and local leadership and demanding real answers. Supporters of those officials argue accusations should not outrun evidence, especially in a charged political climate. But the accountability question is still fair. If programs collapse under fraud, leadership cannot just shrug. The enforcement official described the Minnesota work as the beginning, not the end, of the investigation push. That is the line that should make every alleged fraudster nervous, because prosecutors are signaling momentum. They are not saying case closed. They are saying look around, because the next knock may be coming. And politically, that changes the atmosphere around every public assistance program under review. The reported fraud involved programs connected to food aid, housing support, healthcare, childcare, and disability services. These are not luxury programs. These are programs that often sit closest to families in crisis. So when fraud drains them, the moral outrage should not be partisan. It should be national. Major media outlets may focus on the political fight, but the deeper issue is government trust. If citizens believe the system cannot protect basic funds, every future aid request becomes harder to defend. That is why sentencing matters. It shows whether the system treats fraud as paperwork or as a serious betrayal. A 40-plus year sentence tells the country that stealing from emergency programs can carry life-altering consequences. And for anyone watching from the sidelines, that message is impossible to miss. But enforcement after the fact is only half the answer. The other half is prevention. How did applications get approved, payments processed, and warning signs missed for so long? Those questions matter whether the officials involved are Republican, Democratic, local, state, or federal. Taxpayers deserve answers without being told that asking questions is automatically political. Online reaction has been immediate, with many Americans demanding audits, arrests, and stronger guardrails. Others are warning that anger must still stay tied to evidence, indictments, and court-tested facts. That balance is exactly where serious commentary has to live. Tough, but not reckless. Here is the key timeline: massive food aid fraud, major sentencing, then a wider federal fraud announcement. And that timeline matters because it shows a widening story, not an isolated courtroom ending. And once investigators start following money trails, those trails rarely stay neatly inside one headline. According to the source narrative, federal officials suggested more Minnesota-related enforcement work is still ahead. And that puts pressure on agencies, contractors, nonprofits, vendors, and political leaders connected to these programs. It also raises a bigger national question. How many other emergency-era programs need a second look? Because if one state saw this much alleged abuse, Americans will ask where else it happened. Expect the media class to split this into camps, one side demanding answers, the other warning against overreach. But the public does not need spin. The public needs audits, prosecutions where warranted, and safeguards that work. If the government can send the money out, it must be able to prove the money reached the right people. That is not radical. That is basic stewardship of public dollars. The original script framed this as vindication for independent scrutiny and a warning to alleged fraudsters. My view is simple. Anyone exposing fraud should be protected, not punished, if the facts back them up. At the same time, accusations against public officials must be supported by evidence, not just anger online. That is how you get real accountability instead of noise that lets powerful people dodge the hard questions. The real test now is whether this crackdown expands recovers money, and prevents the next taxpayer betrayal. So here is my question. Do you think this is the start of a real national fraud reckoning? Or do you think Washington will punish a few people, hold a press conference, and move on? Tell me below, because taxpayers deserve answers, and vulnerable Americans deserve programs that actually work. Subscribe to Uncle Sam Briefing for more sharp, evidence-driven updates on stories the country cannot ignore. Stay with us, because if federal officials are right, this fraud story is only beginning.